Welcome to Textural Anthologies, the podcast series that explores the personal and professional side of creative individuals. My name is Massimo Casagrande, and in this first series, I will be focusing on the slash culture. Today's creative boundaries are blurred more than ever, and with this series, we will explore how the creative industry and creative people are influenced and inspired by other disciplines. Over the next few episodes, I will be having informal conversations with friends, colleagues and fellow slashers to discover more about their stories, their journey, what makes them tick, and above all, their creative outlets. Enjoy the episode. For today's guest, we travel back to the UK and meet a friend and colleague who defines herself a polymath. Someone whose expertise lies in different subjects, solving problems by using learnings from every perspective. She's someone who blurs, or rather pushes and explores the boundaries in garment construction, from crossing over from pattern cutting, traditional savile row tailoring skills mixed with knitting skills, to working with surgeons in developing surgical pattern cutting techniques, all the while creating interesting new volumes and silhouettes. From the London 80s Blitz scene with her pop-up shop inside the iconic Club Heaven, to designing costumes for the BBC's Top of the Pops dancers, to a residency at the Victorian Albert Museum, where she developed knitwear by researching 16th century armour, to working on a new book, and let's not forget, designing for Britney Spears. I'm happy to introduce today's guest, a true Renaissance woman, Juliana Sissons.
Hi Juliana, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And, thanks for your time to be able to talk. As mentioned, what I'm doing with this podcast series is trying to talk to friends and people I know about creativity and how we use creativity in different ways. And also how we're not just defined by one discipline and how it interlinks and with all other disciplines. I usually start off by asking my guest, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, it's interesting because I remember a conversation I had with a teacher at primary school. I was 11 years old, and I said to the teacher, the teacher asked me what I wanted to be. He was asking everybody. And I said, I want to be a fashion designer or a teacher. And the teacher said to me, well, you're not clever enough to be a teacher, so you'll have to do art. And that was at 11 years old. And I think that really has affected me throughout my life, because from then on, I accepted that because, that was gospel that came from the teacher's mouth. But from then on, I feel that I have been trying to prove myself all the time throughout my adult life. And I'm constantly trying to learn things. So it's really, I ended up doing both of those things. And I bet if that teacher's still alive today, I'd like, I'd like him to hear this podcast. But, when we were little, we're going back, it's the 60s and 70s. And, I was a dreamer. I loved Margot Fonteyn. There was things like black and white Hollywood movies, the cabarets, the Ziegfeld Follies, even cowboys and Indian Western type movies that my granddad used to love. We had a very sort of, it was quite fanciful, is it? Fanciful, is that a word? It was very, it was all drawn to America, actually. A lot of those things were drawn to American, TV. And I think, the word, polymath is quite an interesting word for me, because I'm always wanting to learn something new. I'm wanting to fill in the gaps of the knowledge that are missing, the bits that are missing. I'm trying to fill those in all the time. If there's something else I can add. Multiple interests as well, but that also enhance the main thing that I'm interested in, which is about clothing.
Yeah.
But I think, going back to that being a dreamer, it was really more about, I wanted to be a fashion designer but it wasn't really a fashion designer exactly, because I didn't really know what a fashion designer was. And if you think of fashion designer, the term fashion designer, there's so many different types of fashion designers, and it certainly wasn't about working in the industry, making mass production clothing ranges, which was it was more about in that time in the 70s and maybe even in the early 80s. There wasn't as much there there wasn't the opportunities that they have today in that field, like the big manufacturing companies. It was very dull. So I think actually when I did a diploma when I was 19 at Loughborough College it was then, because in those days you either went to an art college or a tech college or a university, and the universities were there for either science or maths or English, but certainly not art.
Not for
if you were on,
you
went to art college, yeah. But even then I was thinking, I did fashion design for 3 years. It was very, very technical, very, very pattern cutting based. But what I came up with at the end of it was very theatre, costume, dance, punk rocky. It was very different to everybody else's in the group that I was in. And I remember the teacher there saying to me, but that's not fashion, it's costume. And I thought, well, but what is fashion? You know, this isn't fashion to me. This is, so I struggled to think about what is it exactly? Am I a fashion designer or a costume designer? And for years, I started to think, where do I fit? Where do I fit? And actually, it's really good because as I've got older, I've realised you don't have to fit in anywhere. You make your own career, you know. So, I mean, I went on to do, you know, tailoring and knitwear and pattern cutting, you know, but all of these have been focused around clothing. So it's not like going off on completely different tangents.
Exactly.
But I think about creating a theatrical vision or creating a beautiful image is more what I'm into, and also looking for new techniques, you know, through possibly understanding of the creative traditional crafts and things like that, you know. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I'm interested in, really.
So before going into knitwear, you actually started off with tailoring, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I worked at Hewitt's in Savile Row, and I really had a fascination of construction. I think, how did that come about now? So I was working before that. I'd been working in light entertainment, so working at the BBC. And it was making costumes for the Zoo dance group on Top of the Pops, working for commercials, working with other dancers like Hot for Dogs and things like that. Very, very cheesy corsets.
But I guess that helped you sort of create that mix between costume and fashion, because obviously you were looking maybe at the London scene at the time, but creating costumes for the dance. So it is sort of the interlink between the two.
It was completely interlinked. I mean, when I was working for Top of the Pops, there were half the crew that I was out with the night before were there dancing. They were all fire eating or doing something like that. But I think what that mainly, I mean, this is me trying to find something more to do. And when I look back, I think I really enjoyed that period of time. But it was called light entertainment. And I think, you know, it's making things for effect, tell a story, to reflect a theme. But I felt there was something missing. So that's why I wanted to do Hewitt's. I wanted to go to Savile Row. And I'd always been interested in the sort of the finite technical details of construction, and that's something that I didn't know. So the first thing I did was took a cleaning job at Stewart's. Stewart's. It was Stewart's. I think some of these people probably definitely dead now, because they're all really, really old people, old men actually, that was in charge of Savile Row. Basically, it was run by men. But I did this cleaning job there, and I remember coming in from a night out and going straight to the cleaning, and I didn't tell anybody else what I was doing because I didn't want them to know, but I was like literally there from it was only like an hour a day or something, but I needed to be there. And the smell of the room and the polished wood surfaces and the suits hanging up and the fabrics and the smell of the woolens. And it was just like, oh, it's another place, you know. It was a complete contrast to what I was doing outside of it, that I just felt I needed it. I needed it somehow. Anyway, I mean, I'm talking about, 19 years old here. And And then I met these people called J.A. Terrys, who were making shirts for Savile Row, who were also in Savile Row. So I started working with the shirt maker there for maybe 1 or 2 days a week. And then eventually I got the tailoring job, whereas in Hewitt's, but, today's generation, you just go straight to Hewitt's and say, look, I want to learn tailoring, get on with it. But I didn't have the confidence. I felt I needed to get in there first and work out where what it was about,
And when you got the tailoring job, was it like, did it come from them, or did you sort of then pluck up the courage and ask them sort of, can I do tailoring?
No, I think they invited me into that.
Okay.
But it was somebody else. It was through networking. It was another one, further up the street. Okay. And then I met somebody that worked there, and and so on. And it's networking. So then I think I worked part-time. I don't think I worked full-time, but it was enough because I was doing my other stuff as well. Yeah. And at that time, McQueen was doing his stint there as well.
I was just about to say, yeah.
So it was interesting, actually, that he was doing his stint in Savile Row at the same time as me. But with McQueen, I knew him outside of Savile Row. I knew him from being in Islington. Well before, he was only 16 when I met him. So, he was on the scene. He had holes in his shoes. None of us had any money. It was a great, great time. He used to give me advice on really awful boyfriends and things like that. He used to come round we had a flat in Islington, and everybody used to come there to get made up, to go out. It was like a sort of open house type thing, really.
Oh, nice.
But one thing I do remember about McQueen in those early days as well is that after we'd done the Savile Row thing, both of us ended up at Berman's and Nathan's for some reason, and that's, I think, where we started working together, not together, but in the same place. And at that time, yes, that was after Savile Row, and we were both sort of still going out in the evenings. But I remember this really funny thing that makes me laugh still now is that there was a German girl as well called Amelie who was also working at Berman's and Nathan's, and the costumiers, a massive big costumiers, and it was in Camden. And we used to take the bikes from Islington along the river, along the canal, to Camden. And there was one day where he just drove straight into the water and he was floundering out with his bike, floating around, and he got out of it and he was absolutely, totally wet through. And then we just carried on driving to work, and he went to work like that, completely wet through. It was nothing, that we were just laughing our heads off. Nothing really mattered. Nothing was that important. And that's what I can't, it's interesting to think with today's youth, they're so sort of very, very serious. Where in those days, we took things on the chin a bit more, I feel.
Yeah. But also, I really love the fact that, both you and McQueen sort of started off with tailoring, something which is so traditional, super traditional and very sort of, it's part of the English heritage. And it's nice because it echoes what Stephen Colby said. He's the CEO and president of the CFDA here. And when he came to our school to do a talk, he actually spoke about the importance of pattern cutting and how young designers today kind of forget that the construction and the making is just as important as the idea, because you might have the idea, but if you don't know how to make it, that's all it is. It's just this
absolutely
in your head. And and I really like that. And the fact, it's what I always say to students I work with. It's like, you need to know the rules before you can break the rules. So starting off with something so traditional, and I think that's what also made McQueen so great, is the fact that he had this knowledge of tailoring, English tailoring, and he knew exactly how to make something perfect, but then sort of he also had learned the skills on knowing how to sort of distort it or create his signature piece from that.
Yep, I completely agree. I think you do have to look back at the traditional craft skills, and I think that's where he came in to his own. And he did he learned through tailoring and through just picking up and learning yourself actually as you're going along and on the job, not necessarily in a university setting always.
Yeah, and through mistake, through trial and error as well,
Yeah, through trial and error, exactly.
Absolutely the best way of doing it. And then I know you also created costumes for Lily Savage.
Oh, right.
and
Yeah.
Britney Spears as well.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, after Berman's and Nathan's, I'd come from the tailoring into Berman's and Nathan's, doing the sort of more costume side things. It was more uniforms. It was like uniforms and men military wear and all of that. And I'd done enough of that, so I then thought I would go to Cosprop, and this is where. And at the same time, I'm still doing my other things outside of this, working, making clothes for the club scene as well. But it's interesting that how Cosprop was run by, and it still is, by an absolutely fantastic man called John Bright, who's a costume designer, award-winning costume designer. And it was another family working there. Everybody who worked there was really young, apart from him, really. But mainly it was like going to uni again. We were all young. He allowed us to make our own things while we were there. So it was really lovely. He allowed us to sort of grow within the time we were there.
Nice. Giving you the freedom.
I'd made wedding dresses. My drag costumes, I was inviting people like David Dale, Juicy Lucy, Lily Savage, all of these who were really up there at the time doing drag and theatre, into the studios of Cosprop. So as soon as the work job had done, as soon as the work had finished at the end of the day, I'd be there fitting up all these drag queens in the corsets and God knows what. And John didn't mind. He absolutely loved the idea that we were doing something totally different. Because, if you think during the day, you're looking at things like, we were working on fantastic things like Room with a View, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Downton Abbey. It was all about history. That's where I wanted to learn the historical side of costume at this point, and to actually get a really good understanding of that and about the underpinnings of that and the underwear and what went with it, So it's like every time I've got something on the go, whatever it is, my job, I'm doing something that's complete opposite in my own time. So that's contrast all the time, complete contrast. But I think Lily Savage, I remember him coming into the dressing rooms there, and I think I remember making a black and white zebra skin fake zebra skin jacket for him. But interestingly about that is that just recently I was around at a friend's house, Kevin Millins, who was the manager of Heaven nightclub at the time, back in the 80s. And we had a look through his old news clippings, and he's got a picture of Lily wearing that dress with, and it was all about animal rights. So, and it was fantastic. And I must look into that more, because it's the early 80s, but it was all, and if you think about that time when they were throwing blood on the catwalk or paint on the catwalk. Remember that? You
should find pictures. But if I'm not mistaken, did you have a shop called Call Me Madam inside Heaven's nightclub?
Yes, I did have a shop I did. And the shop I had was tiny, but it was more like it was a place to meet friends, and I had rails of clothing there, took orders from, from sort of nightclub personality types, and I took orders for BBC and for TV. And it was mainly that, and then I'd sell a couple of little bits, but most of the time we were like, it was more like a little private party hangout place. I think the leather shop took a lot more money. I mean, they were really serious. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think we used that room as a promotional place for, displaying the clothes, really. I mean, some people would come in and try the stuff on and wear it for an hour and bring it back. It was awful, really. There were things on the wall. It was a place to be seen in a way, I think. It was a meeting place. I could be sitting there wearing silver lame dress with diamante necklace and, all of the glam stuff. And then it's all about showmanship and show, the rails of clothing and who's around. And, it wasn't, Kevin Millins quite liked the idea of that happening in the club, I think. And I think that's why we got that. I got that free, the rent. I didn't have to pay any rent for that. So that was amazing. Yeah.
Good. And then you got into knitwear, which is it's sort of a very specific craft, isn't it? Knitwear. How did you go sort of from tailoring into the knitwear?
No, well, that was a lot later on. I started doing the knitwear,
Okay.
and I think it was really to do with looking for other ways to develop shape. So fully fashioning, fabric can change. What I love about fabric is that, it can change. It can be, you don't have to just buy it on a roll. It changes throughout. So you might have something that's dense, something that's transparent, something that's sparkly, and it could be all on the same piece of fabric. So what's so fabulous about knit is that it's sculptural, it changes, it's ever changing. I can't imagine how anybody could not come up with ideas to do with it. And it was something that was very, very, when I started doing it, was very not known so much. I mean, it's more popular now, but at the time, I think only Julian MacDonald had started doing a bit of knit. But then he went on to do sort of red carpet dresses after that, really. But, if you think about what you can do with it, I mean, there's some designers like Sheo Yang Shen, who uses nylon fibers to make big pom-poms, so you're wearing a big pom-pom. Cassie Green is a designer as well who looked at materials, looks at really ornate, luxurious materials, putting beads into the knit, and long tubes of plastic tubes. So it's very, very artistic, I met a designer who when I was working at Parsons a couple of years ago, Catherine Mavridis, and she was looking at 3D coiling techniques. So I think with knitwear, I think it's more about the fact that you can it's a creation. It's a three-dimensional sculptural piece if you want it to be. It can be about, Fair Isle, and it can be about tradition too, but it's also, it can be anything really. I mean, you can coat it and then you could treat it like woven fabric, but it can be textural, it can be sculptural. I mean, I love Siblings as well. They're showpieces. They're that complete Fair Isle outfit with mohawk hat thing. I mean, that was lovely.
I wonder do you think that maybe during lockdown, quarantine, where people were sort of stuck at home and they're either like me baking banana breads or whatever, do you think that maybe people have started exploring knitting? I know I've got some friends who started doing crocheting, so they were showing me how to do crochet.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of lessons, like online lessons coming up.
Yeah.
Throughout that whole lockdown period. I mean, if I'd had my knitting machine here, I definitely would have been having a go again on it, but I haven't got it here. So I've gone through the lockdown period working, actually, delivering online tutorials and so on. So I didn't have that luxury of trying something new and having that time for myself again throughout that time. But I do, what I can say is I think the students, if I can say about the students that I was teaching, I mean, they went into lockdown mid-March and they were just about to start knitting their collections. These are the knitwear students I was teaching. And some of them didn't even have knitting machines at home. So I think what happened there was not that they were particularly, I think they had to look for other things to do with knitwear and become much more confident, much more sufficient.
Yeah.
And they looked at things like fabric manipulation to create ideas of what knitwear could be, and to other ways to show that they could understand knitwear. And there's a digital app called Pixel Design, and some of them were making designs, just designing fabrics online through that. And then, of course, there's Clo 3D as well, which they were all getting into to try and show how their knitwear would have looked if they'd had the chance to knit it last term at the university. But I do think there's a lot of people, through that lockdown period, a lot of people did start to look at making things, like you say, your banana bread and so on.
But craft, people were looking at craft.
Absolutely.
I think also from sort of a mental perspective, in a sense, like, because you're in lockdown, to keep your mind active. And I think also distraction, because I think I found, at least in lockdown, that, we continued working during lockdown. me, for example, and it's the hours blur. When you sort of have your day job, you leave in the morning, come back at night, you have a distinction between hours. Whereas when you're working from home, everything just blurs. And I think taking up a craft, be it baking or making cocktails or whatever, it helps mentally also just to kind of have a break from work, because everything just blurs together. So
absolutely. And and with knitting is something that everybody can do. They can pick up and do it. And
then I know you were a residence designer at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I think it was a perfect transition, because again, you have this love for costume, for history. And then I know that you were given sort of special access for the medieval and Renaissance collection that they had, and you were creating experimental knit swatches based on 16th century armor.
That's true. I mean, I was honoured to have that time. I think it was it 6 months? I think it was. It was a time out. It was at a time where I could take, I mean, that's just recently, really. It's only a few years back, but it was, well, no, actually it's longer than a few years ago now, but it feels recent compared with, when we're talking about the 80s. But yes, I had the opportunity to spend time in the museum and to have access to the textile archives and the armour archives. I worked with a really lovely man called Angus Patterson, who's curator of the armour there in the museum. And I think it was just throwing myself into something totally different again, but also related to what I'm doing. But I think the brief was to look at the medieval and Renaissance galleries and to be inspired by that, and to bring something to the audience, the museum audience, that could engage them in that gallery. And so I gravitated towards the armour. It's interesting because we're so used to seeing sort of grey, dusty old armor pieces, but really, I mean, I'm sure the young men that wore those were at the height of fashion. They were the peacocks of the time.
Yeah.
Wealthy young men. It was made to measure. It was enameled. It was all beautifully made. Can you imagine the men who were wearing these? And it's like it's being gravitating towards these sort of show-offy type people again, making connections as well. And also the fact that it's made to measure, there's a connection with Savile Row there because it's made to measure. There's also connections with knit through because it's made for protection. And in a way, knitting was initially made for protection. If you think about the fishermen going off to seas with their Argyle sweaters and so on. But for me, the residency, it gave me an opportunity to work with wire. And I looked at the gallery and took in all the colours and all the sort of the ambience of that gallery, and came up with some garments and part garments and samples, which actually reflected what I thought reflected the galleries and the armour. And also explored shape making again. If you think about knit, I think what I bring to my knit is the fact that I've got pattern cutting and that I've got tailoring, and that so you can come up with something much more structured, or something that really doesn't look like knit. I work in a slightly different way to the traditional knitter, because I don't hand knit at all.
Okay.
It's all machining. All machine knit. So, and then working with unique, like different yarns, like elastic and rubber, silk and steel, those sort of things, or, things that you wouldn't normally think of working with. And I think that's what I found really intoxicating while I was there.
I remember there was a shop in Seven Sisters that sold these amazing yarns, different thicknesses and sizes and materials. It was so nice. I can't remember the name actually, but it was in Seven Sisters in London. But these swatches you created, are they there do you have them, or are they part now of the V&A sort of archive?
The V&A has some of them, and I've got some of them. I think the ones they've got online are theirs, and then I've got a lot of other ones that I've kept as...
Well, I have seen some pictures online, but I wasn't sure if you could, if the person could actually see them live at the V&A.
I mean, it's very, very hard to make money from knitting, really, because unless you're going very mainstream, I mean, I remember very initially when I set up my knitwear business, I was selling to V&A in Los Angeles and Questionnaire in London, 2 boutiques, very small runs, 15 at the most, maybe a couple of different colours, not much more than that. I really loved it. But, you know, we're talking about Britney Spears earlier on.
Yeah.
This was interesting. Britney Spears bought one of the jumpers from this shop in Sunset Boulevard.
Really?
And I told my son, and he absolutely told everybody in his junior school. And then suddenly I was like the best sliced bread, walking down the street collecting him from school, because at the time it was just before she shaved all her hair off, so she was you know, at the height of her fantasticness. But apparently he bought a jumper from this shop, and then we had all these calls in the middle of the night. Can you do 16 more by next week? Can you do this by next week? And can you do this by tomorrow? Can you send me one over tonight? And I'm thinking, well, there's only, you know, it was a really artisan setup. There was only me and about 3 other girls sitting there knitting away like mad. And I thought, this isn't what I signed up to. I didn't want to be the one that's producing all this stuff. And at the time as well, you know, the factories weren't around, because I think all the Scottish and the northern knitwear factories had either all closed or they were closing, or they were only taking really, really large orders. So it was really hard to actually produce like runs of knitwear at that time. So, and then when I came to do the residency, I'm thinking, sod that, I'm not doing this to sell. I'm doing this for an exhibition, or I'm doing this, try it out, you know. Who cares? You know, it's art, it's not for sale. And I did actually get some orders from 1 or 2 of those pieces, and I just said, no, sorry, I just couldn't do it again. I couldn't do it. They were one-offs, you know, and that's it.
I need to find a picture of Britney with the jumper, and I want to see what it looked like.
Yeah, it was very light pink, and it had ladders all over the front of it, very, very fitted.
Oh, nice.
And a high neck, quite Victorian looking actually, but very transparent at the front. So I haven't seen a photograph of her in it yet. So I mean, let's just maybe something come up. I don't know.
And then I know as well, because of your knitwear, you actually published a book with Bloomsbury, The Basic Fashion of Knitwear.
Actually, I was running a little pattern cutting class in Brighton at the time, and one of the publishers was coming to my class, and she said, would you like to do a book? And I said, yeah, okay then. And it came about through that. And then it was about knitwear, but it was also showcasing lots of gorgeous people's work, you know, gorgeous work from different people's, you know, university students or graduates from Parsons, St Martin's and Nottingham Trent University. And I think, and some designers that I know as well, such as...
Good. You know, Nottingham Trent University is really good for knitwear. I remember going to Graduate Fashion Week, and I think they were one of the strongest with knitwear.
Well, I think is it the only course that does a full degree? The only university that does a full degree in knitwear?
I think it is. You're right. But the students' work was amazing.
Well, I mean, that's why I sort of went to, you know, I gravitated towards them to teach there because of their resources. They have a massive amount of resources and lots more space. So you certainly develop the skills, and then it's up to you what you do with those skills. The students, they need to know the skills before they can do what they can do with it. They don't realise how long it takes to do something good.
I noticed that as well, you know, like creating toiles. They want to create the perfect outfit straight away, and it's like, no, we need to toile it, and maybe you might have to, you know, create the prototype once or twice, because it's, you know, I think it is down to social media where everything is instant. Look at even shopping, for example. You know, you can have a delivery in 2 hours, you can have it tomorrow. You know, it's that wanting things instantly. And sometimes I find the younger generation, maybe it's not just the younger generation, you know, some people just want things now, they don't understand, or maybe there's no appreciation of a craft, the technique, that maybe it does take longer, you know. Speaking of curiosity, one of the things that I remember about you, and it was at Somerset House actually, I came one day, I think it was during London Fashion Week, where they had... Yeah, I think they were having like a series of workshops, pattern cutting workshops. And I remember coming to yours and you were talking about surgical pattern cutting. And it
Well,
was
yes.
something that really sort of blew my mind. It really fascinated me. And then I remember inviting you to
Oh,
come and do that workshop with my students when I was teaching back at the time. And that for me was something completely new, sort of surgical pattern cutting. What was it? And then when you explained the process, I was like, wow. But how did you come about surgical pattern cutting, and like how did you stumble into it?
well, yeah, I mean, I think for the last 5 years, or it might even be 6 years now, I've been sort of doing this research, sort of like working in a research way, developing pattern cutting techniques through looking and learning from surgical cutting. And I was initially introduced to a colleague called Rian Solomon, who set up a program called Skinship. And she, at the time, was doing her PhD on communication and language, and a common language between different disciplines. So she initially got us together, me and a surgeon, and we spent the day in Brighton at Brighton University, being filmed, talking about what we do. So I talked about pattern cutting and she talked about surgery, and this was all filmed. And then we were amazed to see the connections and the commonalities between our disciplines. And so from then on, I've sort of carried on with this, looking and working with original surgical techniques, and developing shaping skills, and make it from 2D to 3D, and make it a shaped piece that could possibly eliminate darts. So playing with scale, playing with lots of paper models and fabric, different fabrics, different materials, looking at knitting. We took it into knitting as well. I've done lots and lots of experiments now, and like you say, the British Fashion Council for about the last 6 years. It was the Anne Tyrrell's Creative Pattern Cutting Seminars, and it was about introducing pattern cutting for what it could be. How on earth would I have ever thought that I would be looking at surgical cutting to create something for fashion, And there's this interesting, because the surgeon that I'm speaking to or working with, she told me that that a lot of those surgical cuts are still being used today, and they haven't really moved on much. And through her talking with me, she's decided to actually develop some of these cuts a bit further.
But it's interesting to hear that this technique of surgery was sort of invented 100 years ago, and there hasn't been a development, that we're using something from 100 years ago when it comes to surgery. It's wow. That's how, I guess, it just proved how avant-garde, if we have to use a term, they were back then. I mean, I think in today's age, we need to reference the past much more. And I sometimes struggle to get maybe the youth to understand certain things, because there's so much that we can take from the past, like even like with Digital Fashion Week and everything. And someone who for me is really great right now is what Jonathan did for Loewe by doing the show in the box. And he was inspired by Duchamp, how Duchamp in the 1930s used to create these subscription boxes. And I mean, oh my God, like now everything is subscription boxes, but it was something that was done back in the 30s. And it's just, we need to look back, even like the little theater, or, that the designers did after the war, where they created all the couture houses, made a little mannequin to show off craft. I think that is definitely something that we need to revisit for nowadays. I don't know. We tend to be not really focused on the past a lot.
No, but everything can be learned from the past. I mean, the amount of things I learned through just looking at original clothing at Cosprop. John Bright has an extensive collection of original clothing from, going back to, the 18th century even. And looking at the way these things are made and the way they're fastened and, the innards, the insides of them. It really is amazing to see that and to learn from that. And I think young people today, the clothes that they're used to seeing are things they can buy, which are mass produced usually, and which they can afford to buy. And I don't think they have an understanding of all what can be done with clothing. So it's definitely something. Exactly. I mean, when I saw this surgical cutting, I thought, oh my God, this is a whole new way of cutting. So for me, it was like I'd been working with geometrics, I'd been working with zero waste, and I thought this brings the two together because this is sustainable, it's zero waste, and it's shaping.
And I remember you had like this little maquette, like this little dummy, you know, it was all layered to sort of show the anatomical features after a mastectomy. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, that, like, it's still, you know, when I think of that, I'm still like, wow, you know, it was amazing to see. And then when you explained it, it makes sense how the two are connected, you know.
Well, that came about by visiting another surgeon down in Wales at Morriston Hospital. And myself and Rian went there for the day to work with him and just sort of be inspired with each other. And it's amazing these doctors or these surgeons can give their time for this. Some will do, and that's fantastic. And they're transparent in what they do and say and think, which is great. And he was saying that he had trouble actually communicating with the patients to let them know what he was going to do, you know, through an operation. And he started to draw, and actually he was drawing illustrations for me, and I said, I'm really sorry, I don't get it. And if I don't get it, I'm sure, you know, somebody, some sort of like, you know, 80-year-old woman sitting at home who's never done any drawing would get it either. So in the end, we got 3 T-shirts, put them on Rian, and we did a sort of mock surgery thing through the different layers of T-shirts on Rian, cutting it and moving things forward and backwards and through and under the arm and so on. And he showed me, and that absolutely blew my mind. So from that, I made some surgical resources for him to show his patients. So that came about through, and that was knitting and other fabrics as well. And that was just another whole project commission that was just something that was just came about through that conversation. But it could be, these things can be written up within PhDs, and it needs to be followed up, really, to be honest. You know, the effect it's had, if any, on the patients, whether that's helped or not.
It would be interesting to see, to hear, actually.
Yeah,
indeed.
Definitely will be. Yeah.
I know that playing with androgyny as a design tool has been an ongoing feature in your work. Now, is that any way related to sort of the 80s club scene, which was all about androgyny? Is that
I think you know it was. I mean, when you think about the 80s club scene, what really brought that back into a current conversation, I think, was that exhibition that was at the V&A, Clubwear to Catwalk. Was it Clubwear to Catwalk? Yeah, Club to Catwalk, that's right. Catwalk, and I had 2 dresses in that. One that I made for Scarlett when she was for her 21st birthday, and another one was a dress for a man from my Call Me Madam collections. And it was amazing that they put that in there, and they put it on a man's model, you know, a man's mannequin as well. And yes, I did a lot of collections in the early 80s. And it came about not by mistake, but I didn't go out thinking, right, I'm going to make dresses for men now. What it happened was I just started making the clothes that I liked. And it was all inspired by Fredericks of Hollywood and all of these sort of glamour things. And it just so happened that the men that I knew at the time really wanted to wear them. So we did. So I thought, well, why not do the fashion show with the men wearing it? You know, so there were things like it was very, very cut, very long dresses, glamour, diamante, leather, lace, net, all sort of 80s sort of, you know, you can imagine. And weirdly enough, we all wore them as well. Like the samples all got worn by my friends and also myself. So like a guy could be wearing the dress one night and I'd be wearing it the next night. Do you know what I mean? And people would come down to the flat to sort of find out what they were going to wear that night, because there were rails and rails of things, vintage stuff and my stuff. And the bathroom was full of mirrors for everybody to get made up in before we went out. And then, you know, the club scene, of course, you know, there was, Lee Bowery and Trojan, Judy Blame, Scarlett, Sue Tilley, Princess Julia, Galliano. Stephen Linnard, all of this crowd. It was like this was another family. I keep saying that these little families of people that are separate from everybody else somehow.
Which we don't seem to have nowadays, I find. And I don't know if maybe we view the past with these like rose-tinted glasses, but I don't know. I think the spontaneity and the creativity of those days, like listening to yourself or even Sue or Julia when they speak about it, sort of like it was about going out just that night. So everything was about that night, sort of dressing up for that night, for that one event, Like now, I don't know, I just find that we need to wear stuff for acceptance, I don't know, there isn't that spontaneity and creativity. And I don't find that there is this little family, like even through art, for example, the YBAs, Damien, Tracy and all of them, they sort of, they were a family in the art sense. And then there was you guys on the other side, there were these little families or tribes. But I don't find that now. Unless there's something, maybe they do exist, but they're completely
it is a different experience. And, if you think about Lawrence, who runs the Egg Club near St. Martin's in London, although obviously through lockdown, that's not happening now. But I met some people that frequented the club there just recently, well, not recently, I say a year ago again, who went to the Berlin Club. And from what I could see is that, all these people are, I'm not a club goer now, but these people were really fantastically dressed, beautifully dressed. And so it's become more like a business to be perfectly dressed. And I think the difference between that and being photographed, of course, and the difference between that and when we were going out is that we weren't photographed. I didn't even take photographs of my first fashion show. It just wasn't a thing to do. I didn't even have a camera. It was all about you're there, you're living it, it doesn't matter. And also you didn't have to be perfect. So by the end of the day, your lipstick's smudged all over your face, your dress is ruined, you've lost your Andrew Logan brooch, and you go home having had the most fantastic night of your life every night, and you didn't record any of it, and you probably snogged everybody around, and and everybody goes home laughing. Whereas today it's much more serious, isn't it? It's a serious affair going out.
Very, very serious nowadays. I think we need that sort of spontaneity back.
And I remember Lawrence took us to New York to do a fashion show in New York, and he took our club kids, us, it was like Judy Blaine, Scarlett, myself, I can't remember the rest, but we all went out there to do a fashion show at Danceteria. It was Lawrence and Kevin Millins from Heaven, and we did this fashion show at Danceteria, and then they came back and did a fashion show at Heaven, and we did it a few times. There was a few of these events, but what am I saying? Oh, yes. The first time we went, we managed to get Virgin Airways tickets free. And the only way we could do it is if we did a fashion show on the plane. So we actually did a fashion show on the Virgin aeroplane with all of our mad garments and us lot all modelling it. And that's just... It was well before health and safety kicked in. Obviously, people were smoking on the plane. It was a lot. It's just unbelievable now what we got away with doing. And I've actually got photographs of us doing our fashion show on the Virgin Atlantic plane with Richard Branson giving us free tickets if we did that.
Juliana, did you say that you were writing a book about the 80s and London?
Well, yes, I am. I've started doing it, and it was in collaboration with the V&A. And I've started looking at, it's about countercultures again and cultural history, a means of escape, looking at what we did, sort of like looking at our communities, like you say, our tribes, what we looked back at for inspiration. What did we look at? We looked at, black and white movies. We looked back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, and we got inspiration. And I've been taking interviews from lots of people to gather this information about what was inspiring for this sort of, generation of clubbers, basically. And then thinking about, so we look back to those people, the cabaret and artists and so on. What did they look back to? And sort of you might see connections then back into the Edwardians and what did they look back to? And then there's things like in Victorian times and so on. And it's sort of making connections, but looking at this type of people, or, you know, who were these people making gravitating towards London, you know, this magnetic attraction to be a group of people who were more counterculture, and making the connections between the different generations. But also I've also taken some, obviously because it's for the V&A too, but I've been taking patterns from original garments from the 30s and from Madeleine V&A and some of those.
Oh, wow.
And I found...
And is that from the archives?
Yes, yeah. And I was doing that just before lockdown, so I've stopped now. So I need to find out what's going on. I think all the deadlines have all been pushed back at the moment. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm finding it really interesting, and I'm finding it much bigger than what I can say. You know what I mean? I think it's more like 3 books than 1 book. But
wow,
but that's
amazing.
I mean, other people have also written books on you know, on the countercultures and so on. You know, so I'm sort of learning. I'm learning again about something that was very interesting, and that I was part of that movement of time, and you know, and while people are still alive, we want to hear it from the people's mouth, from people who have just read up about it afterwards.
Absolutely.
Before digitalization, you could go underground, you could be underground. I don't think underground is possible now because of digitalization.
No, because you have to tag someone, you have to put your location, you know, like, because now it's all about telling people where you are. And I know on your Instagram, you're also posting sort of the images of those.
I started finding, well, that's really through lockdown. That's what I did through lockdown. I started looking at old photographs.
Visual archive.
Much to people's annoyance.
But I love it. And you know what? There's this one group on Facebook which you follow. Now I've followed, and it's all about sort of, is it the rock music, the rock and punk music of the 80s and the 70s? And it's all these videos. And I remember you posted something one day, and I was like, what is this? And it's just so amazing to see, like, these original videos of these like rock groups of the 70s and 80s with the costumes. And I'm like, oh my God, this is such a gem. I absolutely love it. I'm looking forward to seeing the book. I love hearing these stories. I don't know, it just takes you back, and I think it's so nice. You know, I mean, I could chat for hours and ask you more questions, but I know you've also got things to do. So I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing all of this with me. It's been fantastic talking with you and learning more about you, and hopefully see you in Miami soon. Definitely. Once we can travel again. I'd love to have you come over for a visit. Thank you so much, Juliana.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I look forward to inviting you next week to our next episode. So stay tuned, stay safe, and speak soon. Bye.